On a Sunday morning in February of 2020, a jogger named John MacDonald was running along the cliffs near Ballycotton, a small fishing village on the coast of County Cork, Ireland. The weather was savage. Storm Dennis, the second-named storm to hit Ireland in a week, was driving rain sideways and pushing the Atlantic into walls of white water that exploded against the rocks below. MacDonald ran his usual route, head down against the wind, and then looked up and stopped. There was a ship on the rocks, a large ship, 77 meters long, rusted and battered, sitting sideways on a jagged outcrop of stone, as if someone had picked it up and placed it there. No lights, no crew, no flag, no sound except the wind and the sea. The ship had not been there the day before. It had not been reported by any authority. No one in Ballycotton had been told it was coming. The MV Alta had arrived in Ireland the way ghost ships have always arrived, without warning, without explanation, and without a single person aboard. John MacDonald was a volunteer with the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, a man who knew the sea and knew ships. He knew immediately that this was not normal. He ran from the cliff and called the Irish Coast Guard. The Coast Guard confirmed what MacDonald already suspected. The ship was the MV Alta, a general cargo vessel that had been abandoned in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean 18 months earlier. She had been drifting unmanned across 3,000 miles of open water ever since, carried by the currents of the Gulf Stream and the North Atlantic Drift, invisible to radar, invisible to satellites, invisible to every maritime authority on Earth, until Storm Dennis picked her up and threw her onto the rocks of County Cork like a piece of driftwood. The Alta had been built in 1976 at the Tronderverftet shipyard in Hummelvik, Norway. She was originally christened the MV Tananger, a modest general cargo ship designed for short coastal runs, 252 feet long, displacing 2,295 tons with a top speed of roughly 7 knots. She was not built for long ocean crossings. She was not built for the open Atlantic. She was built to move cargo between ports that were close together, hugging coastlines, staying within reach of shelter. Over the following 4 decades, the Alta passed through a succession of owners in a pattern that maritime investigators would later describe as suspicious. She was registered in Norway, then Greece, then Panama, then Tanzania. Her name changed repeatedly, Tananger, then other names lost to the record, then finally Alta in 2017. Frequent name changes and flag changes are common in the gray areas of global shipping, where vessels involved in sanctions evasion, smuggling, or other illicit activities cycle through identities the way criminals cycle through aliases. The Alta's AIS, the automatic identification system that broadcasts a ship's position to other vessels and shore stations, was switched on and off irregularly. Another red flag. Legitimate commercial vessels keep their AIS running at all times. Ships that turn it off are usually ships that do not want to be tracked. By 2018, the Alta's ownership was murky. Multiple parties claimed or denied responsibility for her at various points. Who actually controlled the vessel in her final months of active service has never been definitively established. In September of 2018, the Alta departed Greece loaded with cargo and set a course through the Mediterranean, out through the Strait of Gibraltar, and into the open Atlantic, bound for Haiti. It was an unusual voyage. A ship of the Alta's size and type, designed for short coastal hops, making a transatlantic crossing to the Caribbean, was like a city bus attempting to drive cross-country. The distance was enormous, the conditions would be punishing, and the ship was 42 years old, with decades of hard service, uncertain maintenance, and an ownership history that inspired no confidence. Somewhere in the mid-Atlantic, roughly 1,400 miles southeast of Bermuda, the Alta's main engine failed. The ship was dead in the water, drifting in the open ocean with a crew of 10 men and no way to move under her own power. That distance is the deep Atlantic, the kind of emptiness where the horizon is a perfect circle in every direction, and the nearest land is a dot on a chart that might as well be on the moon. The crew had food and water, but no propulsion, no way to steer, and no way to control where the currents took them. They were passengers on their own ship, drifting at the mercy of an ocean that does not negotiate, and the crew had no choice but to wait. The crew radioed for help. The United States Coast Guard responded, dispatching a C-130 Hercules aircraft from Coast Guard Air Station Elizabeth City in North Carolina. The plane flew over 1,300 miles of open ocean to reach the stricken vessel, and air dropped food, water, and emergency supplies to the crew. Plans were made to arrange a commercial tug to tow the Alta to either Bermuda or Puerto Rico. It would be expensive. The ship was far offshore, and the tow would take days. But it was the only option. Then tropical storm. Leslie began forming in the area. The weather window was closing. A tow in worsening conditions would put both the tug crew and the Alta's crew at risk. The mathematics of rescue shifted. The cost of saving the ship now exceeded the value of the ship, and the lives of the men aboard were worth more than any cargo. The Coast Guard made the decision to evacuate. In early October 2018, the crew of 10 were rescued from the Alta by the Coast Guard cutter Forward and transported to Puerto Rico. They arrived safely. They went home to their families. The ship was left behind, alone, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The Alta was now a ghost ship, and the ocean had just been given a new toy. Her AIS stopped transmitting, either because the power had failed or because there was no one left to operate it. She drifted in the Atlantic, invisible, a 2,000-ton steel hull riding the currents with no engine, no crew, no lights, and no way for anyone to know where she was. What happened next is where the story becomes strange. An unverified report surfaced suggesting that after her abandonment, the Alta was found and towed to Guyana, a small nation on the northeastern coast of South America. According to this account, the ship was possibly hijacked by parties unknown who intended to salvage or repurpose her. If this happened, the plan failed. The Alta was apparently abandoned a second time and set adrift again. None of this has been confirmed by any official investigation. It exists in the gray space between rumor and maritime record, the kind of story that accumulates around ghost ships, the way barnacles accumulate on hulls. What is confirmed is that in August or September of 2019, approximately 11 months after the crew were rescued, the Royal Navy ice patrol ship HMS Protector spotted the Alta, drifting in the mid-Atlantic. Protector was en route to the Caribbean when her crew came across the rusting cargo ship floating alone in the open ocean. They photographed the vessel and reported the sighting. The Royal Navy tweeted images of the encounter, noting with dry British understatement that the ship appeared to be unmanned. No attempt was made to board her or take her under tow. The Protector continued on her way. The Alta continued on hers. No other vessel reported seeing the Alta between the Protector sighting and her arrival in Ireland 5 months later. For nearly half a year, a 252-foot cargo ship drifted across the North Atlantic without being spotted by a single ship, plane, satellite, or maritime authority. The ocean is vast. Ships, even large ones, are small. Maritime traffic in the mid-Atlantic is sparse enough that a vessel without AIS, lights or radio, can drift for months without crossing the path of another ship. The Alta was alone in a way that most people on land cannot comprehend, floating through an emptiness so total that the nearest human beings were hundreds of miles away in every direction. Ocean current models suggest the most likely drift path. After the Protector sighting near Bermuda, the Alta would have been caught in the Gulf Stream, the powerful warm current that flows north along the eastern coast of the United States and then northeast across the Atlantic toward Europe. The Gulf Stream feeds into the North Atlantic Drift, a broader, slower current that pushes water and everything floating in it toward the British Isles and northwestern Europe. At a drift speed of roughly 0.2 knots, or about 4 nautical miles per day, the Alta would have taken approximately 5 to 6 months to cross from the mid-Atlantic to the coast of Ireland. The timing matches. The currents match. The ocean delivered the Alta to Ballycotton with the mechanical precision of a conveyor belt, and it did so without anyone watching. On February 16, 2020, Storm Dennis made landfall in Ireland and Britain. It was the second named storm in a week, following Storm Ciara, and the combination had left the entire western coast of the British Isles battered and exhausted. Dennis was a powerful extratropical cyclone, with wind gusts exceeding 70 miles per hour and wave heights that overwhelmed coastal defenses across Western Europe. Rivers flooded, roads closed, thousands of homes lost power. The Atlantic, whipped into a frenzy by 2 consecutive storms, was throwing everything it had at the coast. The storm surge pushed the drifting Alta out of the open water and toward the rocky coast of County Cork. The ship had no engine, no rudder control, no anchor, and no crew to attempt any defensive action. She was a floating object at the mercy of the largest storm system to hit Ireland in weeks, being pushed toward a coastline that has been wrecking ships for centuries. The rocks at Ballycotton, just west of Ballycotton, are a ship killer, a jagged spine of tide-blackened stone that extends into the surf at an angle designed to catch anything the Atlantic throws at it. The rocks have taken vessels before. They will take vessels again. Sometime in the early hours of that Sunday morning, the Alta hit. The impact drove the ship high onto the outcrop, wedging her sideways between the rocks, with enough force that the subsequent receding tide left her stranded above the waterline. She was stuck. The Atlantic had carried her 3,000 miles, and then, in one final act of violence, slammed her into the first piece of Ireland it could find. John MacDonald found her a few hours later on his Sunday morning run. The arrival of the Alta on the Irish coast caused a sensation. Photographs and video of the ghost ship perched on the rocks went viral within hours. News outlets around the world picked up the story. Within days, hundreds of sightseers began arriving in Ballycotton, a village of a few hundred people that was utterly unprepared for the attention. They parked along narrow country roads, trampled through farmers' fields, cut through gardens and private property, and hiked along dangerous cliff paths in unsuitable clothing to reach the wreck. Tom Clancy, a local landowner, described the visitors as being like a herd of sheep, aimlessly and blindly following each other. The land was damaged. Fences were broken. The cliff paths, already eroded by winter storms, deteriorated further under the weight of foot traffic. Cork County Council issued warnings telling people to stay away from the wreck. The ship was unstable. The rocks were slippery. The cliffs were dangerous. Nobody listened. The Alta had become an attraction, a monument to the strangeness of the sea, and people wanted to see it with their own eyes. The Irish authorities now faced a problem of responsibility that was becoming familiar in the world of maritime ghost ships. Who owned the Alta? Who was responsible for removing her? Who would pay for the cleanup? The ship had been registered under multiple flags. Her most recent registration appeared to be Tanzanian, or possibly Panamanian. Her ownership was disputed. Multiple parties made contact with the authorities, some claiming ownership, some denying it. No one stepped forward with the money or the willingness to take the wreck away. The Irish government appointed a receiver of wreck under the Salvage and Wreck Act of 1893. 62 full barrels of oil were removed from the ship by helicopter to prevent an environmental disaster if the hull broke apart. The commercial scrap value of the Alta was estimated as low, essentially worthless. The cost to the Irish state of removing the wreck was estimated at over 10 million euros. The ship that nobody owned had become the bill that nobody would pay. In April of 2020, approximately 2 months after the grounding, a fire broke out aboard the Alta. The Irish police launched an investigation and concluded that the fire had been deliberately set. Someone had climbed onto the wreck, which was explicitly off-limits to the public, and committed arson. The fire caused additional structural damage, accelerated the deterioration of the hull, and increased the environmental risk from any remaining fuel or chemicals aboard. No one was ever charged. The wreck that no one owned had now been set on fire by no one who could be identified. The impact on Ballycotton has been lasting. The tiny village, population barely 300, became an unwilling tourist destination. For months after the grounding, cars lined the narrow roads, strangers wandered through private farmland, and the cliffs near the wreck eroded under the weight of foot traffic. Fences were cut, gates were left open. Livestock escaped through gaps that visitors had made. The farmers whose land overlooked the wreck found themselves living in a spectacle they had never asked for and could not control. Local Senator Sinead Shepherd later told the Irish Examiner that there had been very little, if any, progress in removing the Alta over a year after it washed ashore. The ship had become a permanent feature of the Ballycotton coastline, as much a part of the landscape as the lighthouse in the bay. The difference was that the lighthouse had been put there on purpose. As of 2026, the MV Alta still sits on the rocks at Ballycotton. The hull has broken in several places. The superstructure is collapsing. Rust has consumed most of the visible steel. The ship that crossed the Atlantic by herself, surviving 18 months of open ocean, storms, and currents that would have destroyed a lesser vessel, is being slowly dismantled by the same forces that brought her to Ireland. The wind, the rain, the salt, the sea. The MV Alta is not a mystery. Unlike the Mary Celeste or the Carol A. Deering, there is no question about what happened to the crew. They were rescued. They went home. The ship was simply left behind because no one wanted to pay for a tow, and the ocean, which does not send invoices and does not wait for permission, carried the ship 3,000 miles across the Atlantic and deposited it on the first piece of land it found. The Alta is the third ghost ship in recent years to drift across the Atlantic unmanned. In 2013, the Lyubov Orlova, a former Soviet cruise ship, was cut loose in the North Atlantic by Canadian authorities and was never seen again. In 2012, the Japanese fishing vessel Ryu Unmaru, swept out to sea by the 2011 tsunami, drifted across the Pacific for over a year before being sunk by the U.S. Coast Guard off the coast of Alaska. The pattern is the same every time. A ship becomes too expensive to save. The owner disappears or refuses to pay. The authorities wash their hands, and the ocean inherits a vessel that no one wants and carries it wherever the currents decide. The Alta is a story about what happens when a ship becomes worthless. When the cost of saving it exceeds the cost of losing it. When the ownership is so tangled and the registration so murky and the insurance so non-existent that no person and no government and no company is willing to claim responsibility. The ship becomes an orphan. The ocean becomes its foster parent. And the ocean, which has been fostering orphaned ships for as long as men have built them, always finds somewhere to put them, eventually. The jogger who found the Alta that Sunday morning in February said he looked up and saw something that should not have been there. A ship on the rocks, in a storm, with no crew and no explanation. It was the oldest story the ocean tells. Something was lost. Something drifted. Something arrived. And now it belongs to the place where it landed, whether that place wants it or not. The motor vessel Alta crossed 3,000 miles of Atlantic Ocean without a crew, without an engine, without a light, and without a single person on Earth watching her go. She arrived in Ireland during a storm, on a Sunday, and was found by a jogger. She has been sitting on those rocks for over 6 years now, and she will sit there until the sea finishes what it started, or until someone finds 10 million euros and the will to move her. Neither seems likely. The ocean is patient. The Alta is not going anywhere, and no one is coming to take her home. If you want to hear the stories of what else the sea has taken and never returned, subscribe. There is always another ship that never came home.